All right, that may have worked. Hello, YouTube. How are you doing? We've got a great show today. Ben, how are you today?
I'm very good. Very good. I'm super excited about what we're doing here and our guest, Dave. So good.
Yeah, our guest, a dear friend of mine and fellow brothers in arms, Dave Haynie is with us from all kinds of Amiga fame. Hey, brother, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, bro. This is good. I'm down here at the beach. It's sunny out, and yet I'm inside with you guys.
Yeah. Well, that to you was happiness. I remember you were you were a Jersey person, the only Jersey person back in the Commodore days.
And Jersey got too crowded, so now I'm in Delaware.
Yeah. Better taxes. It's
no one lives here, and yeah, it's better. It's way better taxes.
So we've beaten the hell out of 8-bit stuff before your arrival here. So we're going to talk about Amigas and 16-bits and the mythical 32-bit. Did you guys do 64-bit when you were doing the Amiga?
No, we did not do 64-bit. It was kind of coming up, and
right.
About the time Commodore ended is about the time we were going to start looking at that. But we weren't into 64-bit.
Okay. So let's pick up the story. Oh, hey, I got to ask you, did you get a chance to peruse my book?
Yes.
I think I sent you one.
Yes.
So anything I got wrong in there?
Not so far. I haven't finished it, but I've read through quite a bit of it. In fact, you sent me an electronic copy, which is nice because that's how I read these days. I also have the actual paper book.
Right.
Yes, that you sent me.
So your paper book is a pre-release too. So that's kind of, there's only like 10 of those, and you got one of them.
Oh boy.
So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks a lot. Yeah. I'll tell you, this has been a great era for Amiga books between you and
David Pleasance.
Dave Pleasance. Yeah. And actually that was an interesting one too, because there's a lot of stuff I didn't know about what was going on, in the business politics side of it.
Right. Yeah, we were pretty insulated from there. And we do have a question, early on, what was the relationship with Braunschweig? So don't answer that now, but I wanted to get that out while I still remembered it, because, we in engineering, we felt like we were the center of everything.
Yeah.
And marketing tagged along. I hear marketing people to this day say, "Oh, they came up with the ideas." That no, I was in the room when that idea was created. Yeah.
It was never my belief that marketing came up with any ideas, at least any that worked. We were always
Jack. Yeah.
It was always yeah. Well, Jack was
Jack was Jack. Yeah, Jack was a marketing force all his own. Yeah.
Jack was, he was a force of nature. He was just, he was whatever he wanted to be. And and that was good for the company. But when Jack left, I think the upper management was pretty rudderless. Once you got into engineering, we kind of knew what we wanted to do. It would have been handy to have somebody say, yes, we can sell this.
Right. Or commit to selling, or commit to that network of programmers that for early support. Remember the TED, that was back when Jack was still there.
Yeah.
We built that alpha unit of the TED and got that out to everybody, to develop on TED before TED was done. That was the one that was in the C64 housing.
Yep. Yeah. Well, we actually, in the Amiga era, we got a lot of feedback from developers, because we actually had an official developers program. We had a technical support group. So we got a lot of developer feedback. We gave them early views on all of the things we were working on. We'd have prototypes out at DevCons as it was appropriate. We talked about, doing full 32-bit before, to give them a heads up that yes, now you're going to have to stop doing things with those top 8 bits of address in your 68,000. You're gonna need to be 32-bit clean, that kind of thing. Right. And and it made a big difference. I mean, Microsoft Basic was never 32-bit clean, but most of the other developers caught on pretty quickly, and it was really actually a smooth transition. You mentioned that earlier about were you real 32-bit? Yeah, our first 32-bit full 32-bit systems were out in 1987 with the A2000 /20.
Okay. Okay. So for everybody's edification, Dave worked on TED, otherwise known as the 264, 364, C16, C116, 232, which later became the Plus4, which we called TED. And then obviously the C1. What's that?
I said, you brought me into the company for that.
Right. And you were still at MOS, so you're one of the few people that worked above the chip foundry. Yeah, so as I call it, the dragon in the basement. And then obviously the C128, and the TED was like good practice for the 128.
It really was. All of the things that were cool about the TED that most people never understood went into the C128.
Yeah. Including knowing how to work with MOS and how to schedule. That's the only reason we got it done on time, is I kept a schedule for MOS's chip runs, and I knew where I could insert a run. And the reason that the ROM story, the font ROM story, where I had to break into Julian's office to steal the font ROM, the reason that was so important was I needed it in early November, or it wouldn't be done in time. I mean, it had to get done before the PLA, the MMU, and all those, because all those slots were filled. So it's like the stupid thing, if we didn't look at the schedule and realize the stupid thing needed to be done first, it wouldn't have been done.
Wow. Okay,
so,
I didn't even know that one.
Yeah. So that's why I did. I didn't do it to be a stinker. I did it because I needed to hit a schedule. And so the rest of that story being he's still under advisement, and I'd already released it to MOS like half a week earlier. So they couldn't recall it. They'd already started to download the font. Yeah. So after 128, I left, and what was your next project?
Well, for a little while, me and Frank Palea were trying to convince the company to make something new in 8-bit.
Okay.
So we had two halves of a Commodore 256. I hacked the 128 to run with 256 using the other MMU.
The other MMU.
And right. Frank got a Z80 that ran all cycles.
Okay.
So it could go twice as fast. And we were
Cool.
proposing we put that together and make a C256. We were also dealing with a couple other ideas. We had one version that was just going to be a really stripped down C128 to compete against cheap word processing systems. I mean, these were all stuff we came up with to try to trial balloon and say, here, you guys, we want to make something.
Yeah.
So that you won't fire us.
What year was that roughly? What year would have that been? About 86?
That was
86, 87.
86. Yeah, that was starting in 86, early 86. Then we had this other idea where we were trying to convince them to use one of the 65816 processors, along with a configurable PLA MMU kind of thing. So that was a little bit more advanced, so that you basically upload the computer you want to be. So you can upload the C64 mode, upload the C128 mode, rather than having to tie it, to build them all in. But that was a little more advanced. They weren't sure about ever being able to be fully C64 compatible with that chip, and so on and so on. And then by the summer, I got pulled onto Jeff Porter's LCD project. No, not the LCD project. I just got pulled on. I got pulled directly onto the LCD was before the 120. After the 120, I got pulled on to help George Robbins on the A500. The company's idea was that since I was the low end guy, I would take over the A500 while George went on to do the A2000 that we were going to be taking over from Germany. It turned out the other way around. George didn't want to give up the A500, so I kind of apprenticed on the A500 for a month, and then they gave me the A2000. I'm like, okay.
That's a big deal.
Yeah, here you are, age 24 or so.
Here, kid, this is the deep end.
Yeah, push.
Yeah, right. Dave mentioned one thing though before we go forward in time.
Yeah.
I forgot to mention the LCD. Here's one, Dave. I have one of 3 LCD computers.
Yeah,
Dave and I were both on the LCD after the TED, And then I jumped to do the 128, and I got Dave into the 128 within about 2 weeks. I dragged him with me. You know?
It wasn't a drag. It was, I mean, the LCD was nice and everything, but I mean, Bill was already my team, right? So
right, and Dave was already mine. Yeah.
Yeah, we wanted to work, and we, I think, given the constraints, the C128 was, was something I'm still proud of.
Yeah, 9 pounds of poop in a 5-pound bag, I call it to this day. We couldn't get 10 pounds to fit. It's
yeah. So they gave me the A2000. They said, well, look into integrating this further. And oh, by the way, we like it on a 2-layer board, including the expansion bus and everything.
Right.
So I had a number of discussions with Fish about that. I had to come up with ways to keep the power clean when expansion cards surged. I had to and all at the same time we were adding features.
Right. And I hadn't even seen a 4-layer board. I don't think was the Z8000 4-layer. It might have been.
Z8000 was 4-layer.
That would have been expensive back then.
It was very expensive back then. The A2000 they did in Germany, which was really an A1000 plus there was an add-on schematic they had given plans to how to build an Amiga expansion box. So they had kind of put those two together, and there was your A2000. And of course, this is something that Henry Rubin was overseeing a little bit. We didn't know about it. That was happening in Braunschweig. You mentioned Braunschweig,
right?
Because Henry wanted his PC compatibility.
Right. And yeah, we'll talk PC because that era I definitely missed. But I do have one final question before we talk more about 2000. Where'd the C128D metal case come from? I can't find anybody that knows. Is that Germany?
I don't remember. I sort of know that we were given that. Like, here's the production case, and none of us liked it because the C128 plastic case was so cool with the keyboard, with the keyboard stashing and the handle and everything.
PCBs,
and they were making the same complaints they always made, like, oh, it's too expensive, it's complicated to put together, you have to have extra shielding. So the metal case was very PC like. So I wouldn't be surprised if they created that in Germany, but I don't know for a fact.
Right. So that's been I looked at the schematics and it just looked like the German office. You know how you learn, like I learned the Tokyo office. Yeah, I learned the German office.
Especially when they were still drawing things by hand. You got the flavor of whose art it was.
The transistor circles were on a metric. There were like a whole number of millimeters on the schematic, probably. Instead
they were using nanofarads, which nobody in the US ever used back then.
Oh, right. Or little boxes for resistors and stuff.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I kidded Al Charpentier about, you remember Sue, the drafts person that drew the C64 schematic and whatnot, had gone to Ensoniq, and so the Ensoniq schematics looked just like Commodore schematics because they had the same drafts person.
Yeah. Yeah, and in some ways, it's even today. It's kind of like people look at my schematics and they know they're either copying mine or they know they're mine because of the way I draw them.
Right.
For one thing, I make sure that all my schematics are readable on 8x10 page or 11 by 8.5 pages because that's the way we're going to print them out.
Yeah,
right.
Totally.
Right.
That's it. I have one template in Altium Designer for my schematics, and it's letter sized.
Yeah, I mean, I have a bigger printer at home, but we don't have one at work, so it's not that useful.
Isn't that odd?
Yeah. So you start into the 2000.
Yeah.
And you continue from there. What transpired?
Okay. Well, after the 2000 was kind of finishing up, I started working with Bob Welland on the A2620. So Bob Welland was one of the Z8000 guys. So there had been like 3 teams of Z8000 project guys. That was the Commodore 900 to people from the outside world. George Robbins, before the A500, George Robbins and Bob Welland had been working on the C900. And unlike the previous 2 groups, or maybe even 3 groups, they actually got it to work.
Okay.
And unfortunately, it was canceled. It was canceled right before, basically they had got it working about the time that that Commodore bought Amiga, and Commodore decided they were only going to make one of them. So at this time, the Z8000 machine was the closest thing to it would have been a Sun 2 workstation. It had a megapixel display. It had a GUI, really, really fast. It was nice. I mean, I would have been happy to have one of those on my desk at the time. But of course, Amiga was sort of this next generation personal computer thing. It made a lot more sense for the company the Commodore was. So Bob went on to help to make the Fat Agnes architecture. He's not a chip designer, but he defined the Fat Agnes architecture and worked with George to make the A500, because they were like, we can make this cost effective so the Commodore can do what Commodore's good at, which of course they did. Jeff Porter was a lot of that too. The A500, making sure that that we were only paying a fraction of the price that Apple paid for the 68,000, the price Apple paid for the for the disk drives. They'd send a chip over to the chip guys. They take it apart, look at it, tell us what it actually cost, so we could bring that into our negotiations for price on this thing. So we were paying $2.50 for the 68,000s that went into the into the Amiga 500, and we were buying them from Hitachi for a while, because Hitachi had been a second source. Apple wouldn't use Hitachi, so they were paying $8 for the same chip.
Right.
We knew what they were paying, because we knew
we knew how to make it. Yeah.
It was Commodore was such was like in such a good position in those days for doing that kind of stuff, because of the chip business that they had. It was very, very cool. So anyway, now of course Bob, the other thing Bob Wellen had been was one of the Unix guys, because of course they'd been wanting to do the C500, the C900, the Z8000 machine ran a version, a Unix-like operating system called Coherent.
So I called it Coagulant. Yeah.
So when they took over the when they got onto Amiga immediately after the A500 was ready, Bob started trying to figure out how we were going to get Amiga Unix done, because of course they still wanted Unix. So they started working on an expansion card for the A2000, and I knew about this because on the original A2000 you had this extra slot it was very much like the A1000's local bus slot. Only that was used because the German A2000 had 512K of chip RAM, and they wanted the machine to ship with a megabyte of memory. So they didn't have a megabyte on the board, so they had this slot that allowed you to put in a cheap expansion card just for memory. That's what they were using it for. I looked at that and said, that's kind of stupid. First of all, I'm going to have a megabyte on the main board. Secondly, that is connected to the local bus, not to the expansion bus, so I can use that to put a CPU in there.
Right.
Just like, so I came up with since I was integrating the bus controller into the Buster chip, I was able to put in a special, essentially a second level of bus arbitration that would allow the slot to take over all the bus requests from the main board. So you didn't have to take your 68,000 out. You could just plug a card in, and there you are. You're now in charge of the system.
Right.
In fact, there's a signal on there called the Boss signal, named after Bruce Springsteen, of course. But that allows that if your card asserts Boss, then it becomes the global master rather than the 68,000 that's on the board, because of the way the protocols went with bus arbitration. It was all done at the CPU level, so you had to redirect it all to if you're going to have another main CPU in there.
Right. Right.
So anyway, so Bob had this 68,020 card design, and it was kind of sort of working, but it wasn't completely working. So they gave that to me to kind of finish up and get ready for production. And Bob was actually getting ready to leave to go to Apple.
He went there and worked on the Newton. Yeah.
He went on and did a bunch of stuff with the Newton.
Wonder if he regrets that move.
No, he didn't leave and come back, but he had also been working on some chips, some chip designs.
Well, he left when I was there, because I remember his last day there, and then he came back, and that's when they brought in Johan, and right?
Maybe. Well, I don't know. I didn't know he had left before that, but
yeah,
he was definitely
I
there.
think he came back.
They brought in Johan. Johan was, of course, he was the chief Amiga Unix software guy,
Right.
and
Right.
always dressed to the nines. He wore like suits, and the guy looked slick. We used to have every couple months we'd have a dress better than Johan day, where everyone would come in wearing suits.
Right.
I don't think anyone ever actually did dress better than Johan, but yeah.
Hey, somebody asked about the name Fat for Fat Agnes. Is that just because it was big?
Yeah, it just so there was all this extra board logic that it sucked in, and so when Amiga was making things, they were limited to 48-pin packages, and when you went to Commodore, you could have an 84-pin package, which was still kind of tiny, but it wasn't that tiny.
The Hershey bar, yeah.
No, it was a square. It was a.
Was it?
Yeah.
PLCC, right?
It was PLCC.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So we had 84-pin PLCCs. That was our largest package. Unfortunately, that was why the Buster was so complicated in the A3000, because that needed like twice as many pins.
But the key to the success in that was the blitter, right? Or would you say it was?
It was everything all at once. There was the blitter, the coprocessor. There was. I mean, the blitter was the thing that made our graphics look like they were being driven by a 68020 in software, rather than because we had all this hardware acceleration. It was actually even more than that, because the fact that it was bit planes. The 68000 wasn't really as fast. The 68020 wasn't really as fast crunching that. It was pretty close because it had actually had a hardware barrel shifter, but the 68000 running multiple bit planes was nowhere near as fast as the blitter was.
Yeah,
now,
that's what made Shadow of the Beast.
Go ahead.
That's what made Shadow of the Beast possible, and the game all of us wanted.
Yeah.
So what's the hold and modify mode, which was originally introduced for TV sets? Did that ever become the ooh factor it was supposed to be, or did monitors make it obsolete?
No, it was pretty much a wow factor for still photos. The problem was it wasn't quite as cool as it would have been, because it was originally designed with the idea of hold and modify in YUV,
right?
Not RGB. So hold and modified YUV makes a whole lot more sense than it does in RGB.
Right.
So So when the RGB, when it became that we were doing RGB, or I don't know, somewhere in Amiga they decided, okay, it's going to be RGB because that's what all the monitors use and that's what all the computer industry uses. So it still made sense, but it wasn't quite as cool. But yeah, it was because back then you had 16 colors on a screen. Didn't matter if it was VGA or CGA or Macintosh or anybody. Actually, Mac hadn't been color yet, so. Mac was still black and white until 1990 or 1991 or whatever.
You're that Apple fanatics. Yes.
Whenever the Mac 2 came out, it was like that was late 90s, late 80s, early 90s. I forget exactly when, but yeah, you didn't have color.
I had to use Mac Classics in high school in my final.
Must have been late 80s, because I ended up having a Mac 2CX on my desk, which ran my logic analyzer. It talked to the logic analyzer through SCSI.
Wow.
And that was around A3000 era. So that was late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah.
Very, very nice to have 160 channels of logic analysis when you're trying to invent a new expansion bus.
What brand analyzer was that?
Oh, I forget. That was it cost. I know it was about $50,000 price tag, and it was one of these weird companies that it wasn't like HP or Tektronix or one of the ones I used 100 times before. Possibly a Gould.
G-O-U-L-D.
Yeah, I know Gould. I honestly don't remember who made it.
Okay. Yeah, I remember we had the HP 64000 for the 128. We had to design our own head for it.
Bill, I have one of those.
Do you?
Yeah.
Still work?
Still works. I've got the 500 megahertz scope card for it. I've got I have a picosecond logic board, as well as the main huge number of channels logic board. I don't do anything with it. It's sitting there. I replaced the original hard disk with an SSD.
Yeah, that's the barrier to me even wanting to try and troubleshoot. Like one of our viewers on our Discord channel, by the way, our Discord channel, go to Coriolis-effect.com. you'll see a Discord invite. We've got a couple hundred people now, Ben, on our Discord. But one of our viewers is Johan Grip, who has reverse engineered the 128 PC board to the point where it works, and he's troubleshot it along. The 128 did have some it did have some jumpers and fixes and stuff. I myself would never even want to touch a 128. We cut the bodge wire here on one show, but the reason I wouldn't is because I don't have a logic analyzer, and I feel completely helpless without. And I don't mean 16 channels. I mean all the channels.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I actually have several.
Right.
Yeah. Every time I went to a new startup company, I got them to buy me a new 1980s logic analyzer.
Right, isn't that funny? And I was in love with the 7D02 logic analyzer insert.
I remember those. Yeah.
So, have you seen one of these, by the way?
No.
Yeah, this is by Johan, and you'll probably be asked to sign some of these. Oh, VCF. Let's talk VCF real quick.
Okay, so he's doing the same thing Chucky Hertel does with
C64
Amiga boards. Oh no,
okay.
Chucky's made like most of the Amiga boards. They just recently did an Amiga 3000 Plus, which was one that we never even built. So and they got the DSP working.
Wow, yeah. Somebody in the chat channel was talking about the DSP.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, what was the DSP in that? Was that a TI chip?
No, that was an AT&T DSP 3210.
AT&T, that's right.
Floating point, none of that. It's floating point, and it shares the bus with the 68000. None of that crap shit that Next or any of these other guys did with the 56K. 56K was fine for making sound, but you couldn't do that much. Yeah. You couldn't multitask. You couldn't do anything really interesting with it.
Do you know who the head of R&D was at Nextcube? Who the manager was?
No.
Shraj Shivji.
Oh, really?
Yes, and I had almost sent a resume there, and I decided not to. I wasn't going to move the West Coast. And son of a gun, it would have stopped on Shraj's desk, and I figure I would have had a shot working there had I known that. So VCF, control your transistors.
This is actually made up the street in Dewey Beach.
I've got to get some of that. I'm gonna get some, have it shipped over.
Before I forget further, April 22nd, April 23rd in Wall, New Jersey. Dave was going to be there both days, possibly stop in on the Sunday. Yes, Andy Finkel will be with us Friday, Saturday. Albert Charpentier he's committed to Friday, and I'm pretty sure he's going to be there Saturday. So come to Wall, New Jersey, April 22nd or 23rd for VCF. On April 22nd, Dave and Andy Finkel will be sitting down with Dr. Stephen Edwards and talking about the Amiga chipsets. And so you can get even more of what we're talking about here today. So plan on being there. It's going to be cool. Provided the virus lets us.
Provided the virus lets us. I know that's the little little asterisk on every show forever now.
Right. Somebody asked about Yanis. I haven't heard if Albert's gotten hold of Yanis or not. Just somebody asked that in the chat room. All right. So I hate to keep interrupting like that. So please continue. You were talking busters and Amigas and buses and. So you worked on the 3000. There was 2000, then the 3000.
2000 we did. So we did 2620. We moved. So one day. Gerard Bucas and Jeff Porter told me, "Oh, we're getting a 68030 in next week, a prototype." So that's all they had to say. And about 24 hours later, with no sleep, I had designed a new. I had a new version. I had redesigned the 2620. No, 2620 was I think the only Amiga 68020 emulator that had the MMU on it, the 68885 or whatever it was. The MMU was needed for Unix. It wasn't needed for normal Amiga stuff. 68030 had MMU built in.
Right.
So I had all this extra space. I put in extra memory, and then I designed the bus interface so that I didn't have to slave the 68030 clock to the Amiga.
Was Genlock still a thing during this time?
Yeah.
Okay. So the main clock, it was actually externally synchronized to video sources still, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you were gen locking, you'd change the you'd subtly change the system clock into an external clock.
Right. Which I can't imagine with a VCR. That clock must have been going like this, right?
Well, actually, you wouldn't probably. I mean, you could. You probably wouldn't gen lock directly to a VCR. You probably use a TBC in front of it.
Yeah,
but,
I know, right?
For any serious work, but yeah,
That's right.
I'm not sure. I don't know how they handled it otherwise. But anyway,
a friend of mine had a toaster.
Yeah, when I did Deathbed Vigil, I used the TBC. I borrowed a TBC Plus from my good friends at GVP.
Great Valley Products. Yep.
Yes, yeah, and that was cool because it allowed. Well, we don't get too distracted, but yes, we will. So that was cool because it allowed you to program things like color correction, video brightness levels, all sorts of stuff that you can do in digital today. You could do back then. So controlling that over AREX, I could knit that into my my video control software, which was Scala at the time.
Okay.
Controlling external tape decks and things like that. But yeah, TBC and Genlock and all that video stuff was still pretty popular. But the so I mean the 68030 card, the 2630 was looking at the 7 megahertz that came up and the and the CDAC. So I actually had 14 megahertz resolution, but I was synchronizing to that for 8-bit accesses, but 20 for memory and regular operations, it could run at 25 megahertz. In fact, at one point I had it running at 33 megahertz. I was using memory and actually using the output enables to bank the memory. I found out that only works for about a day or two, and then the memory self-destructs because it's just not fast enough to avoid continuous contention. They fixed that later. That's what EDO memory fixes. But EDO memory wasn't available back then. EDO memory had the latch and the fast buffers, so you could actually interleave without having to have a set of buffers in front of every bank of memory. I had 4 banks of memory. I didn't have enough room to put in 4 32-bit buffers. But anyway, so I got, and I'd also put an expansion connector on the 2630. It was actually Rev 2 that got the expansion connector. But anyway, so within a week I had Fisher working on the 2630. We showed that off at a couple shows, even though the CPU was on the wrong side of the board because we got the schematic, the pinout backwards. But back in the through-hole,
I've never done that.
The thing is, if I had thought about it, I would have asked him to do that because then I could get to all the pins on the bottom of the chip from the top, from the side that all the other stuff was on it. Well, it actually worked out way in my favor.
It's funny how we learned things back then, isn't it? Inventing stuff as you went along.
Yeah. So that kind of led into the idea of the Amiga 3000. Though that was something that management had a full buy-in on, so we could get more than 1 or 2 people working on it, which was kind of nice.
Right.
There's a question from Mike that's a lot of us have thought about this, but it's probably something that can't be answered because it never even got that far, right? But was anyone even starting
actually
to look at
it's funny because we were looking at everything. When I was designing the next generation Amiga in 1991, I had a thing called Accutiator, which I had originally defined a thing I called the what was it called? The AMI bus, the Amiga Modular Interconnect, which was going to be for high-speed interconnects like to CPU modules rather than using anybody's bus. It was something I defined. Only thing was PCI came out, and PCI answered the same problem with industry standards. So our next generation machine was going to use PCI as the connection for just about everything. And we had looked at Alpha because there's just this big demand for Alpha from people who were doing number crunching and video rendering and stuff. But it wasn't very practical for what we were doing. we weren't really looking at, but we were probably, if we had survived, we would have had some PA risk in there, because the project after AAA was a thing called Ombre, and that was being designed by Dr. Ed Hepler, who had designed his own PA risk core.
Okay.
And he chose PA risk because it was really easy to add new instructions, and he was filling it up with 3D instructions so that it could do, so the CPU could do 3D graphics. It had, I mean, as well as some video instructions, things like add with saturation and that kind of stuff that allows you to very quickly deal with manipulating bits or bytes, because Ombre was actually not a bitmapped processor. You had it was all chunky pixels. It was centered around 16-bit chunky pixels. I think it would do 32, but you could have 4 16-bit play fields going at the same time. And that was none of that actually got built, but it was being designed in the M language. I mean, there were a lot of good processors, and PowerPC at the time was being pushed really hard because we had been looking at the Motorola RISC as well, the 88110, and of course Motorola jumped over to PowerPC once that whole AIM alliance was put together.
Right.
Though that really didn't kick in while Commodore was still going on. I mean, it started to, but it was like, I think if things had been going, we would have at some point had to sit down and say, well, here's where we want to go. I was because of this, specifically because of this question, I was designing the next generation stuff to be completely CPU agnostic. The CPU would be on a board and it would connect to PCI. And that would be, and that would be how thing ran. And the even though like AAA chips didn't interface to PCI directly, we would have bridged it in the first generation and then gone to PCI in the next generation. So you would have had a plug-in PCI card for your graphics. And part of the problem we had too was that we would have ended up having a sideband slot for at least one of the PCI slots, because we were originally, for the low end stuff, we were building these chips that did everything, right? And it's hard to do everything if you've got them on multiple cards, right? How do you get stuff to go back and forth, and what goes on the main board and what goes up top? So, changing over to that architecture was not a one-shot thing, and it would have been kind of tricky, but I was trying to push us in that direction.
So where were chip fab going on during this time? This is all CMOS, right? So MOS, later became CSG, couldn't make it?
CSG could do 1 micron CMOS.
Oh, they could?
They had a CMOS process. All of the
they had a second plant. Yeah, they called it across the parking lot, but it was like a couple blocks over or something.
All of the C65 stuff was done in Commodore CMOS, I believe. All the 45 series chips, but they could do so. The only CMOS chip in the Amiga world at that time was the Lisa chip, which was part of the AA, or as we called it, the Pandora chipset. Because that's when we really opened the box, right? That was the first,
I gotcha.
That was the first all new design, the Lisa chip, and it was the other chips in the system were Paula wasn't modified at all. Alice was updated, but it wasn't wholly new. That was just a different version of Agnes. In fact, I think that might have been the largest NMOS chip we ever made, because it was very, very close to being too large.
Right. So somebody just asked if that you're working on an updated Buster chipset. Is that true?
It's a single chip. I started working on it and then realized that, first of all, my schedule got really weird and there was a lot of family stuff in there too. But I also realized that we weren't able to get the parts to make that an interesting project. Like all of a sudden Altera parts were not available, or you could pay $800 for a $20 part, that sort of thing. Right. So that's kind of been a back burner thing. I haven't actually talked to Jens Scheinfeld about this recently. I was doing this along with his company. And I looked into it. I built parts of it, and I've got some of it running a little bit in simulation. And I figure at some point I'll turn it back on again because the Amiga market's already pretty price sensitive, and trying to sell something like that is going to be expensive anyway. Trying to sell it at today's prices for the things you just can't get, not really something you want to even make available, because it's just and
no one will be able to do it.
There were a few other things I've been trying to get into there that are a little tricky. Like I want you to be able to update the Buster code in system.
All right.
Even though there's really nothing going to the Buster chip that allows that to happen.
Right. So, whoops, that's not the one. Somebody asked about AAA prototypes, and somebody else asked about if we were using photolithography at MOS. They certainly were when I started there.
Yeah, we were using photolithography. It wasn't all RubyLith.
Right. There was RubyLith laying around when Dave and I started, but they had stopped using it by that time. And Albert was talking about the RubyLith cutters, the CNC based
party, and the what did he call it? The picking parties? What was it called?
Where they would sit there and peel the peeling parties.
Peeling parties.
Parties. Okay.
But what's funny about that
it never got, the most aggressive thing they did there, I think, was the 1 micron CMOS. So it never got where photolith was an issue.
Right. So
I wonder when the fabs are actually going to get the machinery done so they can actually do. So all the board houses, all the boutique board houses at least, and US board houses, quite some years ago moved to laser direct imaging. There's probably still a few that do photolithography where you have the films, but pretty much any board house you would do it today is using laser direct imaging.
Oh yeah. Well,
I'm just wondering, when are the fabs going to do the same? Because that's going to actually make the cost of custom silicon really cheap. You'll be able to prototype dirt cheap, and I'm really looking forward to that, getting to that place where you can prototype something on an FPGA and a couple of weeks later get an actual hardened, directly printed, synthesized chip from it.
To answer that question, I think I have seen something about the A500 Mini. Is that using a Raspberry Pi? A lot of them are. I don't remember if that one particularly is, but I actually have. I've been given a number of different post Commodore Amigas. I have a Vampire 4. Yes. The question is, can't you make a new Buster from an FPGA? That's the idea. The problem is that right now there's a worldwide crunch on chips, and you can't necessarily get the part you want. Like you can go on DigiKey and look for a part. You can find a 72-week lead time on some parts.
Right.
Yeah, the problem is production, right? Because you want to do this so that the community can build it or use it. I'm sure there's no barrier to prototyping or design or writing the code, right?
You can see, the thing is, with an FPGA, you can always build a prototype that uses a much more. You could probably make it use whatever you can find.
Yeah,
there were certain requirements we had for what we wanted. For this FPGA, has to have a phase lock loop clock circuit on it, and a couple other things that you don't find on every FPGA.
Right.
Because the idea was to correct some of the issues with Buster that existed because of the level of technology we had back then. It's more than just saying, okay, let's make the original version and then fix the bugs. It's like, let's make it better.
Yeah.
But you have to quantify it better. Am I making it more reliable? Am I making it faster? Is it possible to do both of those things? That's one reason I want you to be able to download the image so that you can say, well, here we came up with this new Buster. Let's see. Let's see what you think.
Right.
Community, test it, see if it works. See if it works across all the hardware, because unlike Commodore, Commodore could get anything they wanted back in those days, and we could test things. And I'll tell you, when I came out with the first Buster, we had Zoro 2 stuff that was failing. In fact, some of it was failing spectacularly, like the Yes, Zoro's a cool name. That's why I kept it.
Very.
Yes. Well,
Was that because it had a bit masking feature or something?
No, Zoro was actually just, it was named Zoro because they had different names of Amiga motherboards. The last prototype was the Lorraine, but before that was the Zoro. So when the book that gave us it was called Schematics and Expansion Specifications, and it had the Amiga schematics and it had the expansion specification for specifications for the Zoro bus. It was called the Zoro bus because that was the Zoro. You know, that was the board it was designed to go with.
Right.
And they just stuck with, they could have changed it when
Yeah.
they did the Lorraine, but they didn't. So the name stuck. It became the Zoro One Card, which was actually a much better card. That's like a large flat card with the wide edge used for the connectors rather than the skinny edge. They plugged in from the outside like a VME board. And I wish we had stuck with that form factor. Unfortunately, it would have made things more expensive. The PC idea of the vertical cards is actually much cheaper to do because you don't need a riser card. Though you look at the A3000, we had a riser card anyway. So what are you going to do?
You know what? And even in the PC world, every branded machine, even to this day, like Dell, HP, before that Compaq, they all had risers.
Yeah, but they're all made by the same company in Taiwan anyway.
Right.
What was that previous question? Oh, the chip shortage. Well, the problem with the chip shortage right now is that you have chips that aren't going to be made for a while because there are, each company has a limited bandwidth. A lot of it's because all of the modern chips are made at TSMC or Samsung or something like that, and they have only so many slots. And during the pandemic, they completely switched around what they were making because the demand for certain chips went away, like automotive chips. The demand for other chips, like home business chips, you don't understand. This stuff is so tightly tuned. A 10% increase is like a disaster,
right?
Because you just don't have that many parts. And so some of these parts that aren't being made, there are brokers out there, or scalpers, however you want to call them, who have like managed to collect some. Maybe they've got the previous generation of the chip. So, for example, there's a little power module from Texas Instruments I use in one of my current products, and these cost about $20 or $30. There's two different ones that I use in a product. They're not available for another year, maybe. We're not quite sure. The power module that we can get them from a broker. One of them is $850. The other one's $950.
Yikes!
Wow!
And they probably have limited supply, but they have them. So I sat down with my trusty brain and schematics and made my own power module that it might even cost less than the TI module once it's done. It's a lot of tiny little parts. I was trying to debug it the other day. I ended up blowing one up trying to touch on the chip probe, and my eyes aren't. Every year my eyes get worse and the parts get smaller.
Right.
There's no way to win. But anyway, it seems to be working now, and so we're gonna have. I'm not mentioning the company because I don't want to get them all. I don't want anybody to get too detailed about this. But it's basically so I built an equivalent power module. It's actually capable of putting out a little bit more power than the one we have in the system. We added like 2 amps on each of them, and as long as it passes our thermal tests, we will now be back in business with a chip we can keep making, with a part we can keep making until those chips go out of availability.
Right.
Actually, the power controller chip, I didn't use a module on this one. I used a controller chip, and it's got a very, very weird, sneaky way of doing current monitoring that is completely barking mad, insane. And I understand why no one wanted to use this part. So you change the choke. You have to change like 5 other parts to create a tuned circuit. So you're reflecting the choke current into a separate side band that now you can measure the choke current there within a gap and set your overcurrent value. And by design, we're not going to ever be able to exceed the current anyway. So really the protection circuit's only for, is something shorted out, let's not burn up.
Right.
Mhm. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So anyway, I digress.
Right.
No, digression is fun. That's what we're all about on this show, Bill. We go down all sorts of rabbit holes every time, and I'm just realizing we've taken almost 50 minutes of your day here. But everyone who's a fan, Dave, knows that you're a musician. And before we started broadcasting, you and I were talking. Bill says he's not a musician. Actually, in his mind and heart, he really is. He just doesn't bother practicing.
I lost a finger. That's my excuse.
That's fair enough, Bill.
You can still drum.
You know what? You're a musician. In here,
Yeah.
It doesn't change in here. But
Yeah,
you said
I mentioned I was doing I did a February album writing month this year, so I have lyrics for 15 songs ready to go.
I am blown away. That's so cool.
I still have some music to write and some recording to do. In fact, at the very beginning of this, I was joking around with the group, and I said, then we've got Music March, or did I call it MIDI March? One of those, and then Audio April, and then
you
May.
do
somebody else mentioned Mixing May. What?
And you do a picture of the day on Facebook. I've seen.
Yeah, I'm like 2 weeks behind. I actually have the photos. I just haven't put them up on Facebook.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, but here's the thing, right? Like this community is aware, and a lot of the people, who are watching now are also musicians. A lot of people on our Discord are musicians. There's this thing about engineering, electronics, and computing, and even it's I think one of the things that's made retro computing a very thriving community now. Music and art is the biggest part of that. Well, and we would never have had things like the Amiga 500. We would never have had even the C64. Like we were talking with Al Charpentier 2 weeks ago, and he was saying he wanted a really good video game machine. That's what he wanted, but he's also musical and went on to design Sonic synthesizer chips. Like the reason we have this stuff is because of artists who were also engineers.
Well, I mean, when it's done right, engineering is a creative art form.
Absolutely.
You're just painting in science instead of in colors, but it really is. That's why,
water.
Yeah. Because, you look at, science is a discovery of something. You go out there and you find a thing that's there and you understand how it works and everything. And every scientist who researches that finds the same thing. They might find a little bit more or less about it, but everybody who designs something in from an engineering point of view is doing it differently, doing it the way their brain works and all that. And that's what makes it so much fun, is that, you start tearing apart somebody else's design. And like when Amiga came along, I had this thing in my head about how stuff's supposed to work. And it's like, yes, this is it. This is exactly how how if I had been a little smarter, I would have done it.
Right. Right.
So that's why I jumped into it with both feet, because it's like, this is exactly the right way to do things. I want to be part of this.
Yeah.
Which is also, also at Commodore. That's because I'd come up on the 8-bit machines before I started at Commodore, and then I got in there and I'm like, wait, I get to do this stuff?
Exactly. That's the saying. It's I get to do this. And I want to say this because I've been through, just personally, this is a personal note, not to be all navel gazing or anything. I actually want to be positive for the community here. A lot of you are out there, you're engineers or technically minded people in some job. Maybe you're doing network management or something, or I've been in 4 years of living hell with golden handcuffs on my wrists, right? Doing a job because I have kids, I have mortgage, 2 mortgages, and I want to do well for my family, and I wanted the job that provided the most income, and it had potential to be really artistic, creative, and awesome. Ending up with Altium and then going to Autodesk, and I'm like, they were great opportunities. So it was an excellent job, but what I realized was there's parts of yourself that you leave behind, and maybe you shouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have that, I get to do this, then that's a clear sign you're doing what you're meant to do with your life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they pay you on top of
you
everything.
you get paid to do it. And right now I'm in that mode right now with this stream with you guys. I get to do this. This is unbelievably
well, in fact,
cool.
I had that same issue come up because the last time I jumped jobs was, okay, my current job was, it had actually gone away a year before, but they wanted to keep me around in case they were trying to sell the technology and everything, and they had me doing all kinds of odd jobs, including I wrote them a song, I did video, I did animation, I did all this other stuff, like, you know, every hat I could wear I was doing to like sort of justify my existence while they sat around trying to sell the company. So when I started at my current company, I was sort of traded, you know, like a sports guy or something. It was kind of weird. And I was like, I took that job specifically because I didn't have to move, didn't have to disrupt my wife, and because I had kids in college. The thing was, it actually turned out to be a really good job with lots of creativity and some neat stuff. Like we're building things that go inside boxes and go outside. So we've got I'm working with a mechanical designer now. So I actually have circuit boards with 3D stuff on it, which is cool because before it was like, you know, you're in a box. You know, you're not too concerned about that. And this was like, well, it's, you know, it's cool. It's you know, and we're doing I had also learned to do radio design at my previous job. And fortunately, I don't have to do that much of it here, but I understand it enough to work with. We actually got in a guy who's like a radio design expert, and we've got some other people working on that. We've got a guy who knows power supplies a little bit better than I do. So you know, it's almost like a real company now.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's way cool.
You know,
and
so
you just reminded me. I still haven't put together. Bill, you had actually done the work to do the animations for some bookends and start screens for our show, but I've been meaning. We've been doing this for a year and a half now. Can you believe it's been that long?
Yeah,
I've been meaning to write a theme song for us, and I still haven't done it.
Yeah, I'll tell you, the animations I was doing too were all whiteboard animations. I wasn't doing anything with computers or anything. I was doing whiteboard animation.
That's cool too. Yeah, the squiggly drawing thing.
Yeah, no, see, that's cool.
Except I misspelled Coriolis effect. Yeah.
Well, of course you did, Bill.
Just update it. It's actually a really cool.
There were times when I thought he hired me just because I had a slightly better sense of spelling.
Very true. Dave, I hired you for all the things I couldn't do, which included math, as you know.
S transforms, yes.
Yeah,
wow.
And you were fluent. You were fluent in at least 11 languages. I only knew 6502 assembler. And, you know, it's a mistake people that hire make is they try and hire them a version of themselves.
No.
And somehow I knew at that age, no, hire what you can't do. Augment yourself.
Well, see, that's actually, there have been studies on that. And the people who it comes in levels. Like at the top of the level, you want to fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
You know, if you're a little bit below that, you kind of want to hire yourself. If you're a little bit below that, you want to hire people worse than you so they won't show you up. Microsoft did a big study on this, and they were absolutely correct. And then they got so big that pretty much everyone they hired was, you know, throughout most of the company was hired by somebody who didn't want somebody as good as them.
Yeah,
because it just, you know, at some point there aren't that many people you can get who are better than you.
It is so true. And what's the logical end point of all of that? Complete disaster. That's when you have a company full of people who walk around with a pencil in one hand and a piece of paper in the other to look like they're
I always looked at it as this is why a small company can outperform a big company and come up with new technology faster.
Yep,
and Commodore, I call them the little big company because when I was there, it was still, we went from a core of like 8 to 11 people doing all the work to a department of 50 and 8 to 11 people were still doing all the work. Yeah. Yep. So, hey, final question from me today then is,
Okay.
what do you think happened with the Amiga? Why is Commodore gone? Why is the Amiga not on everybody's lips these days?
I mean, I think it was just a matter of being able, of Commodore not understanding the market, not knowing how to sell it. I mean, we gave them we had, and well, there's a couple things. Part of it is that when you're not selling, you're not bringing enough money. When you're not bringing enough money, you can't spend as much making the next generation. Also, when you're paying your big bosses $3 million a year, back then,
that's a big
back
deal.
then,
right? Yeah, like the top people at Apple were not making that much money. The top people at IBM were not making that much money. So, imagine another $6 million a year put into engineering in those days.
Oh my gosh.
That wouldn't have made a difference. We could have made more chips. We could have made them faster. We had the AAA project going in 1988. Right. That was going to deliver 64-bit graphics. If that had come out in 1990, it would have set the freaking industry on its head. If it came out in 1992, it would have been pretty good.
If it had come out,
if Commodore hadn't failed, it might have come out in 1994. Those delays were entirely based on how much you had to spend on it.
Right.
It wasn't the lack of brain power.
Yeah.
Well, what didn't you guys have then? You finally weren't given the money you needed to develop the chips because you were fabbing outside of Commodore and it was expensive.
It was expensive because in the end, Commodore couldn't make AAA chips, and like I said, they could just barely make one of the Pandora /AA/AGA chips, the Lisa chip, because when we got to production, we were having the Lisa chip made at HP, because this was before people really did contract chip manufacturing. So whoever it was at MOS, probably Ted Lenthy, was calling around to all these different companies saying, "Can you make chips for us?" And we never thought about that.
Right.
So who knows? Maybe he started the industry. Maybe he started that whole business. I don't know, but because that's like how everyone makes chips today, right? But back then. But the thing is, it's just like today in that you have to get your orders put in place because they have a production schedule and you have to slot your stuff in there. So in 1991, when the bad people took over Commodore at engineering level and decided that the new systems weren't good and shouldn't come out, they didn't place the orders they needed for the AA chips. So Lisa chips didn't get made in vast quantities. Then in the fall of 1992, when everyone wanted an A1200, they had not ordered those well in advance at HP, so there just weren't that many Lisa chips. And so there were all these Commodore Amiga 600s that nobody wanted. I realize today people like them because they're tiny and you can put a flash drive in them. But back then, nobody wanted it. And meanwhile, you couldn't make enough A1200s. So that was sort of the first year where we saw, wow, you always sort of wanted, what could have been to match what was, but you didn't always hit that level of expectation. That year was one where it's like they could have sold, 3 to 5 times as many A1200s probably if it had been available.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
My brother started his career as a graphic designer with an A1200, and he bought every additional bit of hardware he could get to add on to it.
A1200 was it was good in the same way the A500 was.
Who did the 1200, Dave?
George was a little bit involved in that, and
George Robbins,
Brian Fenimore.
Okay.
Probably a couple others. By the time we were into the Pandora chips, I was like doing all the advanced project work. So in 1991, I booted up the first A1200. I'm not A1200. I booted up the first AA Pandora system in February. Well, actually, it booted in March. It booted in January, but the display didn't work because the Alice chip was messed up. We got a new chip in February. It booted up. It was running Workbench. The software wasn't done yet, but it was working. It's like I had found the bugs in the chipset and worked them around with using some of the glue logic so they never actually had to fix them because I was detecting cycles and figuring out where there was like this situation where the blitter was getting in when it wasn't supposed to.
Pipelines are off by a stage or something like that.
Maybe it was the pipelining of the signal itself that told you to get off the bus. It was a little weird because all of a sudden we went from a regular 16-bit bus to a 16-bit bus that was also a 32-bit bus for the CPU, but it was also a 64-bit bus for the video processor because it was a 32-bit bus that was double cycled for the Lisa chip. So there was some synchronization stuff that changed. But I could have gotten, we could have, it was substantially working there. It was not 6 months away from being able to be shipped by then, other than the fact that that summer they kind of put the brakes on the whole thing. In fact, my machine was dubbed the A3000 Plus because it popped right into an A3000 case. Over the summer of 1991, it became a firing level offense to put an A3000 Plus motherboard into an A3000.
Wow. I heard stories. I'd heard like next person that calls it the Amiga Junior's fired, because the guy came from PC Junior world.
Anytime you hear weird shit like that, that something rotten is there in the state of Denmark.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So is your video? Tell us about your video, because for me, the Commodore is sad. It's a sad story, and every time I talk with old friends, ultimately it turned sad, right? Because we had so much potential. We did sell billions in the beginning and then stopped. So you did a video. Is that available online now, or are you selling it? Or
it's on YouTube for free. And until a while ago, it was available for purchase at Amazon, but they shut that whole business down, so you can't buy it anymore. But you can watch it for free.
Why did they shut it down?
They had this print on demand system for video, but I think they're just all going to streaming now. I don't think they care too much about the physical product.
That
they
can
make as much money. And I never had it.
I thought it was some story like, I thought it was like a CEO or someone who was being accused of being the fat cat.
And they weren't coming after me. I was a tiny little drop in the bucket. I was selling a couple of videos a month in the last few years at least. It was I put it on Amazon mainly because they came up with that service.
Right.
Getting dry here. And I just wanted to put it out there. And then when YouTube finally got to the point where you could put a whole movie up and it wouldn't look entirely like crap. I mean, I shot the thing on an 8mm camcorder without a microphone, with the built-in camera microphone. I didn't know what I was doing back then. I bought this camcorder to shoot pictures of the babies, So, I mean, I learned video after that. I keep looking at that like, man, I wish I could have done that again with with my modern knowledge, even with the same equipment or slightly better equipment back then. I could have borrowed stuff, but it was what it was. I had to get special permission from Amazon to even have the video for sale because they were looking at, this is not professional quality. And I had to explain to them how it had historical significance. And they said, fine, as long as you put a disclaimer on here. Because
right. This doesn't reflect badly on Amazon. So, the name of your video is Deathbed Vigil. So people can find that by Googling it.
You can find me under Dave Haynie or probably Hazy Dave on YouTube.
Right. There's that Bruce Springsteen reference that Dave was alluding to earlier. Dave's handle back then was Hazy Dave after a Springsteen song.
Spirit in the Night. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I tell people, if there hadn't been Keith Emerson of Emerson, Lake and Palmer, I probably wouldn't have gotten into electronics. I could visualize, the music. I could visualize it in a way that math and my form of math, let's call it that, in electronics and stuff merged when I listened to ELP.
Honestly, Carl Palmer was one of the people who wanted to make me a drummer because I had listened to that. Like, I want to do that.
He talked with his drums. Yeah.
My parents, my dad was not about, my dad was full of musicians. He didn't really want me to be a musician because everybody else was. So, he's like, we're not going to have drums in the house. So I spent years trying to learn analog electronics to make my own electronic drums. I had a few that were kind of okay, but I never got it that good as a teenager. And then I started getting to other things to do with electronics that I could actually get pretty good. So I stopped working on that. But and then I was always in music. But the thing was, my mom was a choir director, so I was a required member of every church choir she had, and that taught me to sing. So when I got out and started doing my own music, I was the singer. And then I started picking up harmonica because somebody said, well, the singer's got to play the harp, so I started playing harmonica. And then years later, when all my good music friends decided they wanted to be in IT instead and, not have a band even on the weekends or something, I said, well, I'd better learn to play something myself. And first it was the computer. First I was just sequencing stuff. And then I decided I'm going to take a decade off and learn to play an instrument, damn it, before I pick up the computer again. And so that might have lasted 2 decades, but I did learn to play guitar.
Who was Jim Ruhlhauser shot the video of? Who was the artist that
Nash
did a lot of?
Slash.
Thank you. Gosh, that was going to bother me. Yeah, we were big Nash the Slash fans. Google
Nash
him. He was way ahead of his time.
Yeah. He had a bank of synthesizers. He played an electronic violin.
All MIDI sequence, which allowed Ruhlhauser to take several concerts and clip them together. And it was way before we synchronized stuff, and he could do it because the material
everything was on the same time base. Yeah. That was pretty incredible stuff back then.
Nash is dead.
Nash is dead. He also shot Guar.
I didn't know that.
Okay. Guar is the most over the top stage band you've ever seen. They come out in monster costumes.
Yeah, they're metal
all from outer space. They play heavy metal.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're really funny, and they have
I follow them on Instagram.
Parts of the costume that make it look like they're vomiting, but it's just like some goo they mix up with oats, like oatmeal.
I remember. Kiss throwing up on stage. I remember those days. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, Nash always wore a butcher's apron, and he sliced open his guitar halfway through, and guts fell out, and like they're all. I mean, his violin. There's all kinds of stage. I mean, the guy had a sense of stage like that was just like it was really over the top. But I mean, he was the real deal when it came to music.
Yeah. They took an Alice Cooper show and said, how can we take that next level?
Dopes on the water. Deep Purple is their name. That was one of his modifications of
Yeah, they were funny. So I was gonna say, like, I grew up with heavy music, playing guitar, but also into electronics. But when I was a kid, me and my brothers used to fall asleep at night listening to Tangerine Dream.
Oh, I love
Tangerine
that.
Dream.
Yes.
Yeah. When I was in college, when I was in college, I came in listening to all kinds of electronic music. I left listening to punk.
It's all good, right?
And alternate rock. No, I mean Tangerine Dream and was it
Autobahn? Yeah. I'm trying. Synchronicity. Did you say that?
I was wondering if the people in Tangerine Dream ever got into Amiga or used Commodores for part of their shows, because everything was sequenced.
A lot of the early electronic guys were using Amigas. I don't know specifically who, but like, I mean, not the 80s electronic, well, not the early 80s electronics, but eventually you get a lot of these
monophonic back then.
Yeah.
Well, Joel Zimmerman, who is known as Deadmau5, who's ultra famous, started out with,
that's who we were trying to
say.
He started out with trackers.
Yeah. Well, I think trackers were really one of the first got the techno sound.
Yeah.
Whoop. We lost you there. You're back.
Oh,
me? Yeah. So you said they were the techno sound. I didn't know if you said
really. It's just in a tracker you could very easily get that kind of sound. And so I think a lot of people who started out, making electronic EDM techno were, at least cut their teeth on trackers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whether they still use them or not is another story, but you'd have to ask
there
the
are
individuals.
Easier ways to do it now.
Yeah.
Trackers were like actually extremely clever, because how could you do this with a text-based user interface. Like
Yeah.
how could you sequence sound using text? And tracker is the natural, like the piano roll. And we had pianolas. My parents had a pianola, the analog version of a tracker, where you put a roll of punched tape inside the piano, and it would play you a song.
Yeah.
Using valves and air and weird stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things I've used for music from time to time is, like I mentioned, Acid, which was kind of like a tracker, only you have direct audio samples rather than voices. So you've got a computer that's fast enough to do the whole DSP thing and combine as many audio tracks as you like.
Mix it all down, yeah.
But it's still it's based on loops. I mean, they eventually evolved it to the point where we didn't have to be a loop. You could have full tracks in there. So I kind of use that to finish off a song. Like I have this song on YouTube called what's it called? Coming Soon, Better Run. It's about zombies, and it Coming Soon, Better Run. It's about zombies and
middle managers.
Oh, it's not exactly, but it's but I put in a lot of like sugar, like like little details in the music and some samples and a few other things like that through Acid, which was sort of the last stage of the whole development of that song. I do remember Octamed.
Where do you publish and perform your music, Dave? Just so people know where they could
well,
find any of it.
I have a little bit on SoundCloud, but it's pretty old because I haven't recorded a lot of stuff lately, mostly because I said, I've been trying to learn to play it better live. So I play in front of I have a group in Philly. I play every other weekend live. I have I'm this year because of the whole album writing thing. I'm actually trying to get enough songs together to
do a whole album.
To do a whole album's worth. I don't know if I'll put it out or just put it up on SoundCloud or something, but I'll probably do both. But yeah, I want to actually get it back into. In fact, the room I'm in now is my he shed down at the beach, my beach house, and I can play music in here at midnight and my wife won't wake up. And that has actually been one of the things that's prevented me from doing a lot of recording. Yeah. I've had two houses in succession. That's the last 20 years where, no, more than 20 years, where I have a music room, a dedicated music room. And yet I can't use the damn thing in the middle of the night because it's too close to the bedroom.
Right. That's why I rented this office. I have this half of it is business and design work. And what you see behind me, that cognac brown wall, is actually an acoustic. I made acoustic paneling and put them up and attached them. The whole rest of the office space is insulated. And the other side of that is we've run some shows where where the viewers have seen it. That's my music recording workstation, and the opposite of that is the electronics workbench.
Yep. The only thing I have to do here is I have to turn off the heater or air conditioning if I'm going to be recording something acoustically. But I've got an 8-channel audio interface sitting here on the desk. That's the small one. The 16 channels back in the other house. And
very cool. That's cool. What's your interface? What
microphones? The one I have here is a Focusrite.
Yeah, those are really good.
It's an 8i6.
Yep,
Scarlett.
Those are very nice.
And
very
nice
and really affordable.
I have a Tascam at the other house, which is it's a 14 analog 2 digital track recorder. I use that for mobile recording too. In fact, I did an album on SoundCloud. There's an album I did for my sister's band. They were called that was their name. The Funkin' Soul Nuts, and their logo looks like Dunkin' Donuts.
That's
and for about a year and a half, I've been pestering them to let me record them because they're they're trying to get gigs, and on their website they had a bad iPhone recording of a couple songs, and I'm like, no one's gonna hire you when it sounds like crap. You gotta have something professionally recorded.
Really
so I went there with my 14 tracks and recorded them, and mixed it, and it sounded well. I learned a lot fixing that, because they made some mistakes, like their sax player changed his reed right before the gig, so he was squeaking half the time. We were doing multi-tracking, but the drummer didn't have a click track or whatever, so each one was slightly off, and I managed to put the whole thing together. They broke up.
So much,
but it's there online if anyone wants to check out my sister's keyboard playing. She's very good, by the way. She actually double majored in mathematics and piano at Oberlin Conservatory.
That is a beautiful combination.
Yeah. So, Dave, you were a combination mathematics and computer sciences at Carnegie, right?
I did computer science parenthesis mathematics, because they didn't actually offer an undergraduate computer science degree, electrical engineering and psychology.
Oh, okay. So yeah,
just an all-around genius.
Yeah, I had 0 degrees, so I had to get somebody that had at least 2, to make up for mine.
And Bill's the guy who taught me that the degree doesn't matter.
My background was I repaired things. I was a TV repairman in the 70s, and that's it. And so I came to Commodore. The one thing I had that I had staked out was I was a troubleshooter. I could fix anything.
He's the guy who showed me that when you turn down the room lights and look at the scope, you can see that one little trace that you couldn't find any other time.
The retina burn stories and stuff. Yeah. Yeah. So anything to say to the people that are still hanging on to the Amiga dream out there?
It's not me, but the community is keeping it alive.
Yeah.
In one way or another. And that's what I said. I've been, for the last 10 years at least, I've been like putting my foot on the ground and saying, if it runs Amiga software, I don't care how you get it, because all of those old computers will eventually die. Now, we have this whole industry, at least in Europe, with recapping computers so that the capacitors that die won't kill it when you turn the power on. But eventually, they're just not going to, and if they all go, same with the 8-bit stuff. If it all goes, then who's going to remember it? And who can play around with it, and who can still have fun with it? And I mean, right now, it's just to have fun with it. But why the fuck not? Why not have fun?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's an Australian post-punk band called The Living End. They had a little bit of success here in the States, but they're not quite as well known. But they had this song that's kind of like this, but it was about heritage property called All Torn Down. And the whole song's about, we're fucking incredible. Excuse me. Sorry,
you're the one that wanted a family show.
You're influencing me. Anyway.
Yes, the evil influence.
Sorry. So, but the song is all about the words go along the lines that the concrete's barely set before it's all torn up again. And that's the semiconductor world more than anything else.
Oh, I'll tell you, I had a design.
It's all financially motivated, but
the semiconductor industry is crazy. I had a design where I put down a chip, and by the time we were even getting close to production, it had changed companies twice.
Right.
It's like, who am I even supposed to talk to anymore?
Right.
It was. I mean, I was depressed when NXP bought Freescale, who used to be Motorola, mostly because Eva wasn't their rep anymore. And so who am I going to talk to? Where's my inside track?
Yeah, it all just changes way too quickly. And now, like, actually, I even consider to some extent the chip shortage and what we're going through now, which is really hard, it's hard for companies to get products. But in a way, it's a blessing in disguise, because
I hope it's a wake-up call. That it's like maybe the entire chip industry shouldn't be sending 40% of their work to one company.
Hello.
Well, and Intel's moving into this. Intel did two interesting things recently. They're building a fab in Ohio, I think it is.
Yep, reshoring fabs.
They're building. Well, they've had fabs. If they're building a fab, not just for Intel products, they want to be a contract manufacturer.
That's good.
And they bought Tower Semiconductor, which makes image sensors. So I'm being into photography. Sony dominates the image sensor business, and that means that Sony cameras always have the best image sensors because they don't let that shit out until a few generations, right? So I have an Olympus camera that just got like one of the freshest Sony image sensors that's been around in Sony cameras more or less for 2 or 3 years now.
That's why is that the one that's used in the 6000 series? Because those are really nice.
Well, I was thinking the
6700 A6700.
The very latest image sensor technology from Sony is in the A7 IV, the A9 Mark II, and the A1.
So they're the high-end versions.
They've got
right?
the high-end cameras with the stacked sensor, with with all kinds of cool stuff going on. Sony makes good cameras. There's some issues. Like I was just writing an article on Quora. I write a lot of articles on Quora, by the way, and a lot of them are about photography, and some of them are about politics. I was just writing an article about a thing called focus stacking in cameras. So you can take a camera and especially for macro shot, and you can define a range of focus, and have it shoot a bunch of images, and then possibly stack them together so that you can control your depth of field in a way that a lens can't.
Yeah,
and almost every camera company has something like that built into their cameras, except Sony for some reason.
That's weird.
Yeah, I don't know what their deal is.
So 8-bit question. Somebody just asked what the D stood for in the C128D, and I have to admit, I don't remember. We just throw a D on the end?
I think it's for the built-in disk drive.
Disk, yeah.
Maybe.
It made sense at the time. I remember that. But
maybe it's because it's got the disk built in.
Yeah. We don't remember. It was 40 years ago, 38 years ago.
Yeah, it's like we build the stuff and somebody comes up with a name for it. I mean, Commodore 128 was pretty obvious. That no one.
Yeah, we did that. Yeah, that was called the P128 or the B128 or the D128 before we got a hold of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's cool. And, coming up on half an hour, hour and a half. We have been talking 2 hours since we started half an hour early. Can you believe it?
I can.
Any final words, comments, questions from anybody? Anybody on chat, Ben or anybody? Or any comments, Dave?
I'll hang out as long as the questions are coming.
Okay,
cool.
Well, within reason. I do have to walk the dog at some point.
Yeah, there were some others. There were some earlier questions that we didn't get to, but.
Yeah,
I think there was one for you, Bill, much earlier on, and I didn't understand it. That was from. I'm trying to go back.
Somebody's asking about the hybrid in the 1541.
That was it.
Yeah, and I don't know what the question is really. That hybrid was developed by, I don't want to say Mitsumi, but Berlin was working on that, and Katayama-san was also a big part of that. And then he hybrided the C64 cost reduce, pretty much using what I think we learned in the hybriding of the read-write circuitry for the floppy, but I don't know what the question was. So who designed the I can't see without my glasses. A2091.
What?
What's the story of how the names got on the A500? Oh, that's Rock Lobster. Is that what he's talking about?
That was I would assume George Robbins. So George Robbins was a serious B-52s fan.
Yeah,
and there's this. So back when there was, this gets a little complicated, but there was an audio retailer in the New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania area called Crazy Eddie, and Crazy Eddie went out of business. And I wasn't actually involved in this, but a bunch of the guys found out about this and they were having a blowout sale, and they went down to one of the Crazy Eddies, I think in King of Prussia or something, and they bought all kinds of crap and brought it back. And so every Mentor cubicle where we did our CAD had a with a 5 CD magazine. That's how they did multiple CDs back then. My old speakers were in the lab. They replaced them with new speakers. There was all kinds of stuff going on there. And so George Robbins used to go in there, put 5 big B-52s discs in the changer, and just like you get in there and there'd be B-52s. And so pretty much every single code name in his on any of his products relate somehow to the B-52s.
B-52.
And actually that sort of came that also came from a statement supposedly said by Gerard Bucas, who was the vice president of engineering at the time, that basically if this doesn't succeed, meaning the A500, they might as well bring in the bombers and level this place. because they needed a hit. Just having, we could build all these big high-end Amigas that all the video and creative people like, but they never sell enough to replace the C64. The Amiga 500 did sell enough to replace the C64. The 1200 would have if they were able to make enough chips.
Yeah.
What's totally a taser shooting? Somebody's asking if I'm on a taser shooting target. I doubt it. I was never tasered to my knowledge, but I assume if I was,
unless there's some rogue group of marketing people who've decided to wreak their vengeance.
Oh, we used to hunt them at night. Yeah, that was always fun.
That's that would be flipping it around a lot.
Yeah,
we used to have the throw the marketing guy into the pond contest.
Oh, we had I had a party at my house, and we had the hit the programmer with a rock contest. And Jerry Ryan was the programmer, and I forget who hit him, but we got Terry to stand in the creek drunk and throw rocks at him. That was pretty fun. I mean, we
have a heart. Programmers have to fix all the hardware bugs that the hardware
they do.
Didn't have time
yes,
to
and
fix.
the hardware guys have to fix all the chip bugs. At least
right.
They can.
See, it all rolls downhill.
Yeah, but we were the animals. We had a reputation to uphold. If somebody didn't end up bleeding by the end of the day, we weren't doing something right.
And to this day, I've adopted that if I'm working on a project and there hasn't been some blood spilled, I feel like I'm not giving it my all.
Right.
Like this place here, there's a lot of my blood here and there.
Right. I recommend coagulant as to stop the bleeding.
Well, that's also because you can't drink alcohol anymore. So you actually acknowledge the fact that you're bleeding. I just kind of ignore it, and usually it stops by itself. And if not, I get a little dizzy and start paying attention to it.
Right.
As long as it's not making a mess. I mean, it's one thing to bleed a little. It's another if it's like going to make my painting job worse.
So we call that in the, I did emergency EMS medicine. We call that a sanguination, where you bleed out. Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, not a good thing.
For all those personality aficionados out there.
Right. So, hey, Dave, I want to thank you for coming on. Everybody has been real appreciative. We had 140 viewers and more live watching you talk. So this was really appreciate you taking time out of your day to talk with us here, talk about old times.
Oh, I planned my whole day around this today.
Yeah, I kind of do too on Friday.
Well, I want to give you guys, I want to give everybody you and you because you're Bill and meant so much to me in my life, but also, the crowd because, hey, there's, we have, I want to give our fans, our the people who are dedicated to the stuff we did, the best thing they can get as far as talking to us and all. It's, you never know what they want, but, I try to give my all as much as possible.
We'll be gone soon. There's less of us every year,
right? And they gave us so much in return too. I mean, I'm still. This is, I look at this stuff that we did back then as the best things I've done.
Yeah. Yeah,
You know,
and we
it's
didn't make the
meant more to
computers
more
for
people.
ourselves. We made them for the masses,
Yeah.
quite literally.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I did kind of. I was making some Amiga stuff for me too,
I
but
was
the
gonna
thing was,
say,
I was one of them. I was the same as everybody else who wanted it. I just got to get I had the chance to actually do it.
Yep,
Right.
that's right.
to live
That's
with the
what made them
limitations,
excellent. It's what made them
Right.
excellent. The people who made them wanted them for themselves as well, and saw the potential
as well. Not just exclusively, because I can always do that in my in my shop here. But what fun is that?
So again, Dave will be at VCF East April 22nd, April 23rd, probably April 24th. We'll drop in and stick our noses in if we're still around. Depends where we go home Saturday night or not.
Yep.
And
I'm hopefully I think I have the whole weekend available, and we'll have to see how it goes.
We'll play it by ear.
I'm picking Bill up on the way, so
right.
Well,
it'd be like the old days.
Somehow find a way to get the weekend off and fly over there, I'll see if I can do it. But I'm not making any promises.
Yeah, it's a long way to fly. Having flown to VCF West, I can tell you it's a long way to fly for a couple hours, but it's fun. So we'll see everybody there.
Weekend, I routinely, until the latest COVID, I routinely fly over for a weekend to Europe when I have when I have an invitation and somebody willing to cover the plane flight.
Right. You and me were going to go to Amsterdam, and then everything happened.
Yeah, we were gonna. In 2020, the only trip I made was a show in Athlone, Ireland in January.
Okay.
And it was nice, but it was January. It's much better to have it in the summer.
Oh yeah.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank everybody. Ben, good seeing you as always. Dave, thank you for coming on, man.
My pleasure, man.
So,
and we had discussed doing this before, and we did. And it was entirely on me that I didn't come back because I wanted to do it, but it's like, well, this is not a good week. Maybe next week. This is not. So that's why I cleared the day. I'm like, we finally pinned down a day. We're going to do it right.
Well, once I got you for VCF, I knew I could get you for this. I knew it's like, peer pressure works. Let me try it some more.
And I had done VCF before and wanted to go back.
Yes, you had.
Now that I'm not as fat as I was back then.
I lost 50 pounds since my last VCF. So it's.
I gotta go and hey, look at me. Look at the guns. Look at the only slightly rotund belly.
Both of you guys actually look pretty healthy. You're in good shape.
We're in our 60s. It's hard to believe.
Good shape.
Yeah, well, that was part of it. Was that I'm in my 60s now. Actually, I had done very well before COVID, and then during COVID, I was not doing as much exercise. I was eating and drinking too much. I was depressed. Then I said, well, I said, fuck that. I'm going to start getting healthy again. And I've been very good. I also got a dog, and the dog needs to be walked 4 miles a day.
Excellent.
Or she's going to get fat. And if the dog gets fat, I get in trouble with my wife. So in fact, right after I get off of this, I'm taking the dog to the beach.
All right. Very cool. So, we'll see everybody here next week. Yep. And thank you all for joining us. This was a blast. And we'll figure out what we're talking about next week. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Bill. Thank you, Dave.
Thank